So as I was setting up this camera setup, I have, the mic and, getting the lighting right and, just getting the angle, making sure it's focused enough on my, just woke up face. I obviously noticed, I assume you can also notice, obviously, that, there's a kind of half line between the amount of light I have. So on one side it's really bright and then one side it's kind of dark. And then obviously it reminded me of the topic I have on today, the idea that there's a bit of a hard line between, the general populace and, the idea of the expert, and how it's often in many areas in society, including social justice and say science, where there's a bit of a chasm, that's only filled by a few people who are like half casuals on say YouTube who explain things in detail, you know. But yeah, big question today. Where are the academics? I asked this because in numerous conversations I've witnessed on the internet, and I assume you've also witnessed on the internet and in other circles, say casual circles at like the pub, when discussing, big issues. Obviously I focus on like social political issues, but other things like science and stuff, or, whatever, biology. There seems to be this weird absence of people with actual academic knowledge or actual academic tenure, people who actually spent time reading and discussing and debating, in tactful, meaningful debates about such issues. And I always think as university becomes more of a distant memory for me, although it's only been like months since I graduated, I often yearn for like those type of discussions where you actually have speakers and people, write things down and discuss things. And of course, it's very important to be able to just discuss things freely and not always have a structured, debate about everything. But when that structured debate is all but missing in general society and is kind of secluded to the universities and other academic institutions, I sense a problem in that. Makes me think of the fact that, say, when someone brings up the idea of, like, say, feminism, for example, one is more likely to recognize the name of Emma Watson, the actor, as opposed to someone like Jennifer Saul, someone who's actually written books and, is the head of philosophy at Sheffield, I believe, at the time of speaking, for example, and how she's actually spent years dedicating herself to certain arguments and issues and debates amongst feminists or in other, issues that are brought up in philosophy. And then obviously that brings up the question of what can we actually do to bridge this gap between the academic and the, the general populace, the plebiscites. And maybe that joke about the plebiscites partially points to the issue that, the big issue of people who avoid experts because they don't like being talked down to, and how people who are, well schooled, I wouldn't necessarily say well educated, but well schooled and, have masters and whatnot, how there's often a bit of a gap between them in terms of nature, in terms of class. You could also point out, the lower likelihood of being, say, working class, or maybe being the child of an immigrant and doing a non-direct job. So, for example, me being a child of an immigrant, people like me have more pressure to do jobs that are very direct, like law or being a doctor or something, and aren't able to do the more purely academic things at university, such as, say, philosophy, or you could say literature to a certain point. And this is probably where the rift is also caused, So then that obviously leads back to the issue of the echo chamber within academics who, have their good, nice, clean, academic pursuits and debates, in this nice little building here that we've all paid for with our money or our parents' money. And then the people on the outside that are a bit locked out and are never even able to be aware or made aware of the fact that these debates are taking place and these actual productive debates are being taken place. And then, naturally these people drift apart. So then when you hear the layman who's more likely to denounce some form of social justice movement or something else, they speak about the extremes that they only see in mainstream media or other things, as opposed to seeing the entire picture of, what everyone brings to the table. Like the fact that people think of certain groups of social justice as monolithic, when even in X-Men, for example, they bring up, it's really an allegory for, the civil rights movement and different forms in which it may have taken place. You got the more hardline, more isolationist, Magneto and the Brotherhood, which is obviously representative a bit more of, Nation of Islam and, you know, Malcolm X, and you got the more kind of sort of open approach, as you know, that is attached to the name of Martin Luther King, and you know, the idea of more peaceful and more integrational approach. You know, so even in that alone, in a mainstream piece of media, do you see that there's a debate between social justice groups, but yet people are quite prone to forget that, you know, obviously not everyone is the same, and monolithic, monolithism is a thing that should probably be relegated to children's novels. But even then, I guess I think children's books should have some form of contrast of character, some kind of conflict of character within the main characters. You know, like look at Timmy Turner. To avoid going on a tangent, look at Timmy Turner and his conflict of character. He's he's this teenage kid who can wish for anything he wants, but he's not necessarily evil, and the things he wishes away do come back to haunt him every once in a while, like his imaginary friend that he locked away. But anyway, generally, I just don't feel that we can't really afford to have this segregation much longer, because obviously the animosity around, you know, the idea of the expert is probably what led partially to, you know, the uninformed Brexiteer vote, you know, whether or not. But then, of course, there's, even in that camp alone, you have, say, the gap between, you know, those people who have, like, you know, you could say the quote-unquote higher-ups, those with actual some kind of political power, who maybe had different motivations for voting Brexit than the person on the street, for example. And, you know, maybe me saying this alone shows that maybe it's my expectation, along of other people's expectation, that, you know, these people are necessarily divided in the same way you have the experts who maybe would advise against Brexit, or at least hard Brexit, for example. You know, the idea that they're against those who would just vote for Brexit as part of a anti-elite vote, you know, and maybe that goes down further into the idea of elitism and the issues of that. And this is just how it's reflected in this part of society, in the sense that elitism and the animosity towards elitism leads to this division in itself. I don't know, it's maybe an issue with, well, partially because of media, but partially because of who we are, maybe just a human tendencies to kind of find confirmation bias and, you know, link closer with those who align with you, in the sense that we're often more prone to have statements and have feelings rather than having proper conversations, where we are liable to change and liable to really find out something new about the world. I mean, Twitter is obviously a very good example of this. You know, the fact that you can see segregated parts of Twitter, like Black Twitter, or you could have, you know, gamer Twitter, or old person Twitter, or like, you know, white supremacist Twitter. You know, and in the sense that these statements, when a statement spoken into one of these spaces elicits a certain response, and given that it only creates further segregation from other groups, whether it be negative or positive segregation, is there such thing as positive segregation, other than, you know, just feeling good about ourselves? Maybe not, I'd argue. But when you have something like a platform that is made for statements, you know, that work as basically dog whistles of confirmation for whatever group that they're produced in, you know, I think there's always the problem where people rest on that and aren't willing to be challenged. But then obviously the other issue is people often don't challenge with tact and challenge with a proper setup, because it's on the internet. Not everyone's gonna be ready with, you know, 3 references and some writing books and something else to bring up, and then a summary, you know, and also given 10 minutes to present all of these things in 140 characters. You know, it's just not really feasible. So I think that's the biggest issue, where, like, you know, a scholarly debate is severely lacking in a society. And maybe it's part of what I always thought of as one way to help combat, you know, extremism or extremist views, for example, is maybe not necessarily, you know, lock, you know, people who incite racial hatred in jail, or some kind of religious based or some kind of cult based hatred in jail, but to basically instead enforce a scholarly debate upon them. So, you know, someone says something about a certain minority, or someone says something like, okay, let's say an interesting one, the view that, say, white people, at least in this part of the world, have a monopoly on racism. You know, that if you are to present such an argument or present such a proposition, then I believe you should be ready to defend it in a real scholarly debate. and not only just say a couple statements, and then if someone says something like a rebuttal, you kind of ignore them and flame them and then go offline or block them, but to actually stand by your laurels and actually stand. So I think in this sense, if we force people into a scholarly debate, it forces them to actually think and assess themselves and challenge themselves to actually think, what do I truly believe in? Why do I truly believe in it? And is there an actual defense for it? You know, like if I think sparkling water is disgusting and anyone who buys sparkling water should do 10 days in a county lockup, I should be able to present an idea about it. Or say, you know, sparkling water is useless, there's really no point of having it, yada, yada, yada. You know, whereas people are allowed to spout racism or spout some other form of discrimination freely. But if we're going to move towards a society that maybe at least doesn't hard punish it but coerces away from it, I believe we should be able to coerce towards better critical thinking for everyone. But yeah, that's mostly my thoughts about the issues of academics. And I think once one actually is made aware of these things, I think there's always that little thing in your head that challenges yourself, rather than having locked off groups which don't really achieve anything. I think it's important to raise the knowledge of everyone to ensure that everyone is able to slightly challenge themselves in their head and say, oh wait, I remember that one example I heard about. Well, I remember that those like, okay, those feminists are anti-porn, these feminists are pro-porn. This group maybe for isolationism, but that's not the entire group. Or this group may actually obviously show signs of, you know, racism, but obviously this is not representative of the entire group of people. And I guess, in essence, getting back to creating three-dimensional characters to interact with, rather than, you know, one-dimensional straw men to just knock down. I think at that point, then we can reach a proper progress in the way we discuss about each other, whether it be friend or foe. But yeah, one can hope. It's not looking too helpful these days, but I think this could be a pinnacle. What's it? A pinnacle. Like if we were to approach things like this and debates like this, I think this could be a pinnacle turning point in how we relate to each other, especially when it comes to things like social justice.